questions. So if there are any questions, this is the moment. And I'll try to answer them.
I want to share an insight.
Share an insight. Do you want to speak into the voice?
Mette.
Okay.
Bhupendra, 1 second. 1 second.
Thank you. So I was pondering over the comment I made yesterday, and this morning during meditation it occurred to me that Sheel and Panya are kind of interrelated in a way that Panya leads to an insight or an understanding where the reason why there is a Sheel becomes clearer, and then you don't observe it because you're compelled to, but out of choice and freedom. So it was kind of a delight to have gotten there. Thank you for enabling that yesterday. I didn't get it yesterday, I got it today morning.
That's why the Eightfold Path goes round in a circle. Because you start off with understanding. It's understanding that leads you onto the path. And then the cultivation of sila supports calm. And then with calm, we have a deeper understanding. And then that deeper understanding leads us to realize that it's in our own interest to cultivate sila. So it kind of goes round. It's good. I'm glad you saw that. A very different feeling, isn't it, when you choose to behave in a certain way, and that brings a lot of joy. You know, realizing the value of living in a way that you're not deliberately causing harm to any creature or taking advantage of anyone or anything like that. You're really doing your best to live skillfully. Then you feel glad. And then, as I said, your mind settles more easily. And so there was a sutta where the Buddha actually spoke about this very directly. I think it was the Venerable Ananda who asked him about the value of sila, and he said, well, with sila you live without regret. When you live without regret, then you feel happy, and then step by step to the insight. You know, when the body is relaxed, then you actually see and you understand things much more directly and clearly than when you're feeling tense. So, yes, good. Okay, another question.
Thank you, Ajahn. This is to do with what Venerable was speaking of a couple of evenings ago. She mentioned, I think this was about how to deal with negative thoughts when they arise. You know, you contemplate on their unskillful nature and so on. And one of the points made was that you should take your attention away from them. This to me sounds a lot like distraction. It would be nice if there could be a clarification between that and distracting yourself, because I think that's something that I'm sort of naturally gifted with, you know, running away from a situation or a frame of mind. But, and because, you know, at times it's not so voluntary. I mean, over the past week, you've also mentioned answering various questions about karma and our attachment to it, and some where you said that it's important to sort of invest your attention and the resources that we have skillfully. But to me, at times, this doesn't seem very voluntary. I wish it was. And, well, using logic or intellect, I cannot disagree with you. You're absolutely right. It makes sense. But for me, distraction has been the only sort of, at times, way out. So I just want a clarification between that and what would be the correct approach.
Okay, well, maybe I'll say something, and then if Sister Khemika would like to add, she can do. It's a very, very important point. So one of the methods that the Buddha recommended, if we have got an unskillful thought or something obsessing us or troubling us, one of the methods is to put the attention onto something else. So I think this is most readily practiced when we're actually in a state of formal meditation. So supposing you're sitting here or you're on your walking path and a thought just keeps coming into your mind. You don't want it there. You'd like to get rid of it because it's troubling you and you realize it's not doing any good at all. So you'd like to be able to get rid of it, but it persists. So what to do? So this advice of the Buddha is something that we can apply in our meditation. Now, for it to really what you were talking about, what happens in a voluntary way, like your usual pattern is to automatically distract yourself, to think about something totally different, or to get up and go and have a walk instead, or watch TV, or phone a friend. But what the Buddha recommends is, rather than doing that, is to, having recognized that this is an unskillful thought, an unskillful pattern of thinking, that it would be beneficial for it to not be there, then we consider a strategy. So it's the very strategy is applied from a place of balance. There's some degree of balance. It's not just total aversion. If it's just a reaction, I'm going to do anything to stop having to think about this. I'll, just go and listen to some music or something else. Then it'll come back, because that's only a temporary distraction. What I find is helpful is rather than my meditation object being the particular thought that's troubling me, trying to get rid of it or trying to force it out of my mind in some deliberate way, is to put the attention somewhere else. So some people find anapanasati very helpful for that, just focusing on the breath, really bringing the awareness to the breath and staying with that very closely. That's one way we can do this. I talk about what I call the soft face practice, which is where, if you notice when you're thinking, there's often some tension around your forehead and your eyes. And what I've found helpful is to, rather than thinking I've got to get rid of this thought or I've got to deal with it, is just to relax my face. And just through putting your attention onto the body in that way, the thought kind of ceases to be a problem somehow. So that's like a kind of a natural letting go. So rather than trying to get rid of the thought, struggling with it, which is a kind of holding tight, we actually just put the attention onto something else. So it can be the breath. You can use a mantra, which is a little bit closer, say, to the first method that she recommended of replacing the thought with something else. So if you've got, a thought of ill will or some kind of memory or like a piece of music going round and round in your head, you can just use some kind of mantra, some words, may this being be well. May my mind settle, may this being be well. And so you're not focusing on the thought itself, but you're focusing on something else. But it's a something else that's present, it's there, it's part of what you're experiencing in your meditation. So So you're just shifting the awareness, shifting the focus. And there are other strategies that you can use that I could talk about if you'd find that helpful, but I'm wondering if what I'm saying so far has made sense. Yeah, yeah, good. So I think that's what was meant by putting your attention onto something else. It's not just kind of reacting and going and doing something totally different, but more attending to something, using another meditation object, or putting the awareness on something else that you're experiencing right now. Would you agree, sister? Would you like to say more?
Exactly, that's correct. It's on meditation.
Yeah.
It's part of meditation practice. It is based on meditation. It is based on a meditation practice. Ajahn was right. It's based on meditation. While in meditation, you bring your attention. That is what you do when you, outside meditation, you distract and read a book or eat something. So it's different. So in meditation, you either change the object of meditation or take the attention to something else because you recognize this is unskillful. So what I agree with what Ajahn said. That's all right.
And the body is a very helpful thing to focus on in these situations, because the mind and the body, they're very closely connected. So if you have a worry in the mind, it affects the body. So you can also examine which part of the body is affected. Or if there's anger, say, there's a very strong sensation that you can be very directly aware of, which is helpful because it gets you away from the storyline. With anger, there's always some kind of story. What happened, who did what, and what you're going to do in return, and how they shouldn't do it, and so on. But you can just bring the awareness to the physical sensations that you're experiencing at that moment. That's another way that we can use this particular strategy. So, okay. So I think Mr. Mehra had a question. Same question.
Same question.
Uh-huh.
This replacing with it can be smiling with the relaxation also?
Smiling with the relaxation. Do you see? Smiling?
Yeah, smiling with relaxation.
Yes.
We are replacing the negativity with the smiling with relaxation.
You can smile, yes. In
The
fact,
the question was replacing of the thought, replacing of the negativity. Replacing of the
okay,
negativity.
yes, yes.
Can we replace that with the relaxing with the smiling?
Sounds like a very good strategy, yes, 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 yes. If you find that helpful, then please. The world needs plenty of smiling. So, yes, that's, I mean, yes. I'd say so. It's one of the practices that Thich Nhat Hanh recommends a lot. In fact, when he describes meditation on the breath, he always encourages people to have a little smile on their face. I can't do that very well, but that's something that some people find very helpful. So, yeah. Mitri.
So Ajahn, I had a question about something that happened today. In the morning I found out that somebody who worked for us for a very long time is going to be leaving us, the employment. And he was a rather nice guy throughout his employment. And it was the morning time, and I don't know why I was a bit in a hurry, so I was a bit agitated also. And he made a comment which I didn't expect him to make, and it really triggered off a lot of anger. I don't know why. And I really tried to work on my upekkha and try to be equanimous at that moment, but it was so sudden, and I ended up telling him that, you don't do something that I shouldn't have. And then, on the way while driving, there were a few very rash drivers, and my anger was just getting more and more. I was like, it was just blowing up till I reached here, and then I sat for meditation and it cleared off. But the question is that when the situation arises and it's so sudden, which daily, especially with very gross sensations like anger or agitation, and how can we try and be equanimous in that circumstance? Because again, I regretted it later. When I came here, I was like, I didn't really need to say that to him. I could have let that go, and I could have, got away from that. So, any advice on?
Well, I don't know if you were here when I told the story about the cows and how there are certain states that we need to regard with a great deal of care and respect and caution. So if we notice that we're angry, then you want to have all the danger signals round about. This is dangerous. And particularly if you're in interaction with another person, you need to be really careful here. As you discovered, you said something, you reacted because you weren't quite quick enough to catch it, and then there was a reaction back, and then you had a bit of a, sounds like rather a dangerous drive, but fortunately you survived to come here. So it was obviously a very upsetting incident. You weren't prepared for it, and suddenly this thing came in and triggered something that surprised you. So how to deal with that? I wouldn't even think about upekkha, actually, because I think it's more a case of first aid for yourself. Because you were shocked, you were shaken. And rather than even thinking about the other person, first of all, gosh, that was really a shock. Ouch. I encourage people to say a silent ouch when they get hurt in that way, either by another person or if they trip and fall over, ouch. Just acknowledge that there's been a shock to the system. I then try to come to the breath. So breath can be very calming and settling, particularly the out-breath. Learning how to breathe out in a very calm, gentle, settling, softening way, I've found is very helpful. Just taking time to do that. And only when you've had a calm in-breath and a calm out-breath, and you've done your inner ouch, then you may be in a position to say something. Even if what you say is, that's really shocking, I'm really surprised to hear you say that. We need to talk some more about this later on. So you acknowledge, you let the person know that you're shaken, you're shocked, and you indicate an interest in continuing the conversation at some other time. So you're kind of just slowing everything down. I would say that would be the most skillful way of managing an incident like that. If you can. Obviously, it doesn't always work. The Buddha's advice about pressing your tongue against the roof of your mouth is, of course, another strategy. Just, I'm not going to say anything at this point. You're just acknowledging that you're really upset and doing your best to just contain it. That's a very good strategy in an extreme situation. It's one I've used a lot myself in, say, public situations where it would not be appropriate to express very strong feelings, for example. But the thing with that is, when you use that strategy, it takes a lot of energy, and you do need to actually understand what it was that was so upsetting and difficult for you. So you do that as a kind of immediate first aid, sticking the plaster on so it doesn't kind of escalate. But then when you have an opportunity, it's pretty important just to take time to just reflect. Time on your own, go for a walk in the garden, the park, be around nature, or just sit quietly somewhere. You know, I wouldn't call it meditation, but just sitting quietly and just turning over in your mind what happened and how you reacted and what it was that was triggered, that was so surprising and difficult to manage. And usually you find some kind of an answer when you do that. The other thing, if you've got a good friend, then you can sometimes talk it over with them. Somebody who's going to be able to understand and respond without kind of turning it into a huge drama. But just finding some way to understand and to settle. But this attentiveness to your own hurt is actually more or less the number one thing. You know, kindness, compassion for yourself is what I would say, I would suggest. I hope you find a way to resolve it and have a good chat with the guy. Sounds as though you both got really upset. Yeah. Sorry to hear that. Are there other questions? One at the back there.
Like what Maitre faced today, I feel that if we keep on dwelling in joy, then it becomes easier to handle such situations. Our reactions are very mild because we forget to dwell in joy. So that's why it compounds the problem. That's my viewpoint.
You think to value joy?
If we keep on dwelling in joy most of the time, then probably these kind of reactions will not arise so intensely. We forget to dwell in joy. That's our problem.
Indeed. Just make sure I've understood. To dwell in joy. Is that what you... Yeah. Dwell in joy. That's a good phrase. Thank you. Bhupinder has a question. And he has a microphone too.
In the same context.
Is it switched on? Oh, yeah.
So in the same context, is there also another way that you just don't get overly concerned that, let's say I encounter a situation which is unpleasant and I have expressed anger, and it's the end of it. I mean, I observed that I had anger and I've done something, and if I found something is wrong, I will find a way to make amends, else it's over and gone, and it's like there's no remainder, so it's gone, over. Can that also be a...
Well, it can, but it might not be for the other person. You might feel fine. And it's good that you feel fine, but sometimes if we express anger towards somebody, they might not feel so fine. If there's something we need to point out to somebody that they've done wrong, then it's better that we do it from a place of kindness, not a place of anger. It's good if we take care to set up a suitable situation and explain clearly what it was that was difficult about what they did or said. When we really take proper care, then it can be like a gift. Because none of us can know everything about how we affect each other. You know, we can't. And so if somebody comes along, you know, if we're doing something that is causing problems, and if somebody has the courage and the skill to be able to point that out to us, that's a sign of a really good friend. But if they just express their anger, unless we're very tough, very thick-skinned, very stupid, the chances are that we'll be quite hurt, affected in not such a happy way. It won't support a dwelling in joy. So it's something to consider. I do encourage people. I mean, it is good to be able to give feedback. It's good to be able to point things out, but we need to really learn how to do it in the right way. So that it is like a gift. And then they say, "Oh, thank you. I didn't realize that. I'm so sorry. Okay, well, I'll try to do it differently in future." That's often the response when we take care. But if we're angry, then other things can happen.
Say, for example, particularly in administrative situation. Particularly in administrative situation, let's say I have a manager who's told something and he forgets to do it, and he's told very nicely the second time, and he doesn't do it, and the third time I just express anger and everything gets done, and he behaves better also.
Well, you obviously found something that works in your situation. I can't really comment, you know. I'm not sure what I would do in your situation. I might be curious about why the person isn't doing it. I might want to know if it's because they didn't have time, or because they didn't really understand what I was asking them to do, or didn't want to do it, or didn't feel that they had the competence to do it, or I don't know. But yeah, as a manager, you probably sometimes have to be quite tough. And maybe that's the way to get results in that particular situation.
But you mean to say that to the extent you can avoid hurting the other person, one has to be
It's good to do it without hurting the other person, is what you're saying. Yes, yes, yeah.
The intent should be to not leave a trace of ill will in that person.
Yeah.
So the other person, irrespective, should be able to enjoy responding rather than be feeling oppressed and hurt. And
there's a kind of willingness. I mean, sometimes what can be helpful is showing anger but without feeling it. So
right.
Sometimes that's the language that people understand. You know, so that's another way. But it's interesting. I've had a bit of experience with nonviolent communication. I think some of you might have heard of it. And one of the things when you make a request, when you ask somebody to do something, you may be able to get them to do it, but what's really important is the reason that they have for doing it. Whether they just do it because they're frightened of you, or because they want you to stop being on their case, or whether they do it because they can see that if you do it, it will be for the good of everybody. And that's obviously a much better reason for doing it. Like actually coming around to your Eightfold Path question. You just see that that's the best thing to do. And it'd be lovely if everybody felt that and lived their lives in that way, rather than just living their life because they're frightened of you. It's not very nice to have people frightened of you and to do things out of fear. Though, you know, maybe sometimes there are circumstances when that's the only thing that people understand. Yeah. Metka.
Ajahn, I wanted to ask you, what is the difference or the fine line between ego and self-respect? Like, if suppose I go for somebody's party and the host is not very hospitable to me or a family member, and I decide I'm never going to go to that person's house again, am I boosting my ego, or is it I'm allowing myself some self-respect? Where do we draw the line between the two?
This is something, that's a really important question, and it's something that, in a way, you get a feeling for. I would say over time, there may be times that you respond from ego, from feeling of hurt, upset, how dare they treat me like this, how dare they treat my family members like this, which is a kind of puffed up kind of feeling. You sort of, you make yourself very big. And then when you go home and think about it, I'm imagining that it may be that the mind actually doesn't settle very easily, that the mind might go into some kind of justification and indignation and so on. On the other hand, if we can come to a place of mindfulness, a place of presence, and we respond from a sense of this isn't right, this is not an appropriate way to treat people, and maybe you say something, maybe you leave the party, maybe after the party you talk to them about it. I imagine that when it's coming from this interest in just supporting the person in treating others in an appropriate way, that actually there'll be a settling and a feeling of gladness that you were able to speak to the person in that way. Usually you kind of know if it's the ego thing. The mind gets very, very busy at those points. Whereas if it's just a clear, this is not okay, there can be a settling, the sense of, yeah, that's the end of it. It's like a letting go. So you may never go back to their house again, they may never invite you again, but there's a feeling of this was finished in a good way, rather than just me storming off in a huff. But you may, I think it's the kind of thing that you probably get it wrong. Well, we all probably get it wrong a few times before we actually are able to cultivate that degree of discernment where we can actually recognize what's going on in here. And also, how the other person is receiving what we say. Yes?
Can we talk about Vedana Anatta a little bit? Because of all the khants, this is the one that I get swept away by the maximum. And I tend to take it a lot personally. Theoretically, I do understand it is all Anatta, but it troubles me the most, and sometimes for days. So can we talk a little about...
So you're talking about Vedana, feeling.
Feeling.
Yeah, Vedana Anatta. Are we clear what feeling is? Because it's not the same as emotion, you know that. It's difficult to see you because you're standing in front of the mirror, the window. Yeah, okay, that's better. So in Pali terminology, Vedana just means pleasant, unpleasant, or neither pleasant nor unpleasant. It's not connected with emotion. Emotions may have, what we normally refer to as feelings, like you've hurt my feelings. I'm angry and I'm upset, I'm frightened, I'm sorrowful, whatever. Those kind of feelings are in the sankhara category. They do have a feeling tone, so they are, they will be either pleasant or unpleasant, or neither pleasant nor unpleasant. So, a sorrowful feeling is usually referred to as dukkha vedana. Happy, cheerful feeling is usually referred to as sukha vedana, happy feeling. Calm, neutral feeling is neither pleasant nor unpleasant. So in terms of Vedana, it seems to me to be relatively simple because it's not difficult to kind of depersonalize it. It's just the quality of the particular experience that we're having. You know, either we want more of it if it's pleasant, or we want to get rid of it as quickly as possible if it's unpleasant. Or we often just don't even notice it if it's neutral. So with each of those, they change very, very quickly. They can, and the same experience can sometimes be happy feeling and sometimes be an unhappy feeling. So we can explore, investigate feeling in that way, and we can recognize that that these feelings are based on our experience. They're very much linked with perception, with sanya, and so with memory, with recognition. They're very much linked with our conditioning. You know, how we see things, whether we perceive things as being pleasant or unpleasant. So, and there's not really very much we can do to control them. You know, we can be aware of them. So the Buddha, in his, like in Natalakkhana Sutta, he sort of went through a series of questions with his disciples and said, you know, can you actually ask of my feeling, of the feeling that I'm experiencing, you know, may it be this way or may it not be that way? You know, can you know, do I have the capacity to change it in this way? And the answer is, well, no. Sorry, yes?
I'm actually mistaking emotions for...
So, okay, so the...
Yeah, I'm mistaking emotions because I get swept away by them and I only later realize that...
Okay, I had a feeling that might be the case. So with emotions, yes, they bring up a very strong sense of self, don't they? You know, if we're feeling hurt or angry, it really, the sense of self arises, like Metka's example of, you know, if somebody doesn't receive her in a polite and friendly way, how can she discern whether it's, you know, an ego, you know, my feelings are hurt, or whether it's a sort of more of a sense of this isn't appropriate. So I think it's important to see that emotional responses arise because of circumstances, because of our way of seeing the world, our conditioning, things that are important to us, that these are things that condition how we respond to things. Our habit is to identify very strongly with them, and that's understandable. And so I can completely empathize with your question, because it requires quite a lot of investigation to figure out how to see it as not who and what I am, because we identify with them so strongly. So I'm just sort of thinking about how I deal with it. I find it helpful, which I said in response to another question, I find it helpful to be aware of how they affect me physically. So to bring the awareness into the body, I find is helpful, because you begin to see that there's a very strong link with this. And if we're clear that this is actually not who and what I am, then we begin to, it can help us to have a little bit of this, what would you say, to let go, we can not attach, we can let go of the identification. We can relinquish the identification. So when we're thinking about something that happened, this happened to me, and you know, how dare she? You get a very strong sense of me and the person who's hurt me. You know, it's very separative. Whereas if you come into the body and you're no longer thinking about, as a way of, you're no longer thinking, you let go of the storyline. If you're willing to do that, then it becomes much less personal. There's a sensation in the body, and, you can feel heat, you can feel tension, you can feel a kind of, an uprising of me, and you can just observe that. When we can observe something, that's usually a pretty clear sign that that is not who and what we are. There is the capacity to observe it as just being a phenomenon arising and ceasing that we're watching, we're noticing. We don't have to identify with it. So that's one way that you can contemplate it. I found an interesting incident one time when I was traveling between Chithurst and Amaravati. I'd been at Chithurst for several months, and I was experiencing quite a lot of sorrow at having to leave because it's a place I love very much. And I don't know what happened, but I started feeling sorry for myself, actually, basically. And I was actually crying in the car, and I was having these thoughts and poor me kind of thing, and I noticed that when certain thoughts were there, the emotion would arise up. There'd be the kind of weeping, the sorrow. But if I was able to be mindful and not allow those thoughts any space in my consciousness, replace them just with being physically present with what was happening, then it cooled down. So it's like a way of detaching, not investing, not identifying, not making much of the emotion, but just allowing it to be there, and to notice how it changed, the way according as how I shifted my awareness. That was also helpful. So it's a very conditioned thing, emotions. You can sit and watch a movie. I used to sit and watch movies, and when it was a happy movie, I'd be, I'd like happy movies where you laugh. I'd actually quite like sad movies where you cry. You sit and cry and cry and cry, come out feeling absolutely wonderful. But that wasn't that. That was just something playing in my mind. It wasn't really happening. It was just certain triggers in my mind, or reminding me of certain experiences in my life. It was totally artificial. It was just a piece of plastic, running with a light behind it, and I was sitting in my seat, observing this thing, and all this stuff coming up. So it was like an artificially induced emotion. So it's really worth contemplating these things. Particularly anger and sorrow are very interesting ones. They're very obvious, very direct. You can observe them. Or feelings of excitement and joy. You can observe those as well.
But sometimes there's an undercurrent of irritability or something which I don't even recognize for days. I'm just very curt to people. I don't even know it myself that I'm irritable, to go on to and check on my body. I'm not even aware that I'm acting like that, and there is something going on.
You need to develop your mind reading skills. So try to stay in touch, try to notice when there's that feeling of irritability arising. And usually that's because you're tired, or you're not feeling well, or you just haven't had enough space, enough quiet. If you live a very demanding life, if there are many people coming to you all the time with different needs, you can respond kindly for so long, but then sooner or later, you just need some space. You can't keep it up. So it's like a little sign, it's like a little message from your psyche saying, help. And so it's really good. The sooner we can recognize that, the better. Because then we can actually decide to set aside some time. Even if we can't take space straight away, even if the demands are such that we have to respond straight away or be with somebody straight away, at least we can say, okay, well, this evening or tomorrow morning I'll make sure I have half an hour to just be on my own, as a way of kind of recharging your batteries. and having a bit of a rest. Time for one more, and then we will have to... Yes, Mr. Yeah.
Ajahn, like you said, that these powerful emotions like anger, and they drive your attention to, it's easy to observe. But when you're talking about neutral sensations, something I read Luang Por Sumedho also a lot on focusing the mind on places where there is no sensation, like the thigh or the palm, where it's neither pleasant nor good. Any advice on keeping your mind on neutrality and just focusing on things that the attention doesn't want to be on, actually?
It's a useful exercise, and also in your daily life, because we tend to be drawn to the highs and the lows, the very, very pleasant or the very, very unpleasant. And we often just don't notice the ordinariness of life. We don't really like the ordinariness of life. We can't be bothered with it, so that's why we don't pay any attention to it. And there are people who are always looking for fantastic experiences, traveling here, traveling there, doing dangerous things just to get a bit of excitement into their lives. And so it does take a bit of effort to focus on something relatively neutral. I mean, like the normal breath, like for all of us, start of the retreat, a lot of people feeling a bit drowsy and dozy, but it was partly just because of a kind of unwillingness to be with a fairly neutral sensation, because we're used to a lot of stimulation. So it can be a useful technique just for calming, for settling the mind, to focus on something relatively neutral. And just bringing awareness to different parts of the body, or noticing, when the mind is, quite settled, not particularly happy, not particularly sad, and just feeling at ease with that. Developing a taste for less extreme experience. Quickie. Then we'll stop.
Ajahn, it's not even a question. I'd just like to thank you for that technique. You said that touch your tongue to the top of your mouth. I think, and that's the only one that can give me some amount of hope, in a situation which is very impulsive. Probably the only thing to do, I think.
Yeah, that, clenching your fists. And but don't make too much of a habit of it. just little short bursts, and then make sure you take time to contemplate and to consider, what was it about that was so difficult. So you really take time to understand what it was, whether it was something you were frightened of, or what. Often fear, I think, is at the basis of these things, which can be interesting, and maybe not something that we really want to admit, but it can be a helpful thing to notice. I think many of the world's problems actually are because of fear, and we need to learn how to acknowledge that. We don't have to tell everybody else about it, but we can acknowledge it. If we can acknowledge it for ourselves, I think that's a very important step. So, we'll stop now. The reason I said that is because we're going to have another clinic, and I'd like to just make sure that there's enough time